Hey friends, tonight we're stepping into the quiet shadow of history, into a world where beauty meant danger, discipline, and the occasional dab of arsenic. It's a world painted in pale faces, high foreheads, and vanished eyebrows. So before we begin, settle in. Lights low, volume soft, maybe a fan hums nearby, or a blanket's tucked just right. And if you're watching from somewhere far or near, drop a comment. Tell me where and what time it is. Now take a deep breath. We're heading back in time, where elegance whispered, and sometimes poisoned. In the medieval world, beauty was not a matter of health or glow. It was a silent code, a reflection of class, and a performance in restraint. The first rule was simple. Never look like you had touched the sun. Pale skin was more than fashionable. It was symbolic, a quiet visual announcement that you did not labor, did not toil, did not kneel in soil or stand in wind. Pale meant privilege. Pale meant protection from the elements. Pale meant you lived behind stone walls and velvet drapes. But nature rarely cooperates. Most skin betrays some color, some warmth, some life. So the medieval elite reached for remedies. White lead powder, finely ground and carefully applied, became the base. It created the illusion of porcelain, a complexion that seemed almost otherworldly. Beneath flickering candlelight, it softened the face into something still and flawless. But behind the glow, it carried a quiet cost. Applied again and again, day after day, it seeped into the skin. It settled in the blood. Slowly, steadily, it dimmed vitality under the very illusion it helped create. Others sought lighter tones, with vinegar-soaked cloths, pressed gently onto the face day after day, hoping to leach away the sun's touch. Some turned to crushed pearls mixed with egg whites, creating a thin, shell-like film over the cheeks. The effect was pale, smooth, and unnaturally still. It tightened the skin, concealed texture, and turned the face into something delicate, almost breakable. To complete the illusion, veins were carefully painted just beneath the surface, thin lines of blue drawn onto arms, temples, and chest. It wasn't just an aesthetic flourish, it was a statement, a display of fragility and refinement. Veins meant translucence, and translucence meant status. It suggested that your body had never known hard work, that your blood barely stirred, that your very existence was untouched by lab or heat. Even literature reinforced the image. Poets wrote of women who looked like frost, like milk, like snow draped over marble, faces that seemed lit from within by something quiet and cold. The highest beauty compliment was not warmth or vitality, but softness, stillness, and the delicate suggestion that the soul might drift upward at any moment. It was a strange ideal, rooted in separation from nature, from effort, from life. And it created a cycle of concealment. Skin became canvas, color became threat, and the goal, always, was distance. Distance from work. Distance from exposure, distance from the ordinary. Men, too, were not entirely spared. In royal courts, in moments of ceremonial display, noblemen sometimes adopted the same pale finish, their cheeks powdered, their brows lightened, their skin rendered silent and matte. It was not about vanity, it was about projection, appearance as status, skin as signal. In this world, beauty demanded patience. It required materials, routines, and a tolerance for discomfort. It meant standing still in front of a mirror, brushing on layers of powder, smoothing on tinctures, and waiting while they dried into thin, invisible armor. There was no rush, no spontaneity, only slow transformation. The rituals weren't confined to women or confined to the face. They extended down the arms, across the chest, sometimes even to the feet. Wherever skin might be glimpsed, it had to be ready, it had to conform. Even the illusion of a tan could unravel the entire performance. A single blush from the sun could suggest the wrong life, the wrong class, the wrong story. And so each day the performance began again, the tools laid out, The powders stirred, the vinegar cloths soaked, all in the name of appearing untouched, untouched by time, by work, by life itself. There was no health here, no radiance, no glow, only the soft hollow shine of something distant. Beauty was not about being seen, it was about being admired from afar, not approached, just noticed, like a statue in the cold corner of a cathedral, beautiful but unreachable. And in this pursuit of perfection, the skin became a symbol of everything else. How you lived, where you belonged, what you were allowed to become. In the medieval night, under candlelight and stone, beauty did not breathe, it waited, pale, painted, still. Beneath the still surface of a pale medieval face lay something more than powder. It was a quiet ritual, a daily devotion to illusion, and like all illusions, it came at a cost. The lead-based powder that blanketed noble skin wasn't just pigment, it was alchemy in disguise. White as snow, smooth as porcelain, but laced with something heavy, something silent. The powder clung softly at first, giving the face a matte finish that caught no light and cast no shadows. Under flickering candlelight, it turned the skin into stone, calm, controlled, perfectly inert. But with each application, something changed beneath the surface. The lead didn't rest, it travelled. Slowly, invisibly, it moved through the skin, slipping into blood, dulling nerves, clouding thoughts. And yet no one stopped. The pallor it gave was too prized, its quiet shimmer too essential. So the powder returned day after day, layer after layer. It wasn't the only thing brushed onto medieval skin. Egg whites were applied like varnish, smoothed carefully over cheeks and brows. As they dried, they left a thin glaze that tightened the face and held everything in place. It created a fragile sheen, cracked under heat, stiff under movement, but beautiful from a distance. It hid texture. It flattened imperfections. It sealed the skin like glass. Chalk dust was another favourite. Softly ground and gently tapped along the jaw, it added staying power to the white base. Sometimes it mixed with the lead, thickening the paste, helping it cling through long hours beneath veils and velvet. The finish was dry, unmoving. It did not smudge, it did not breathe. For a touch of colour, just enough to suggest life, there was rouge, but not the kind drawn from berries or flowers. This was mercury-based, deep and dangerous. A flick of it to the cheeks or lips brought a controlled warmth, like embers under snow. It wasn't meant to look natural. It was meant to hint, a suggestion of vitality under an otherwise silent mask. The mercury, like the lead, worked quietly. It inflamed the skin from within, irritated the eyes, trembled the hands. But the colour it offered was exquisite, sharp, vivid and short-lived, a sacrifice of wellness for elegance, a trade most never questioned. Men too took part in the transformation, particularly those close to court life, where appearances were currency and every expression was a performance. Their grooming was subtle but no less exacting. Powdered skin, trimmed brows, light washes of colour. It wasn't vanity, it was presence. Even among kings, complexion whispered more than words ever could. In time, the effects of this devotion began to show. Skin blistered, peeled, broke open in small polite wounds. Fingers tingled, hair thinned, breath slowed. But still the jars were opened, still the powders were mixed, because once the transformation had begun, it could not be undone. The face beneath no longer belonged to the world. Only the finished one did. These rituals weren't confined to preparation, they shaped behaviour. With fragile masks built from powder and paste, even simple gestures became delicate. Smiles were restrained, laughter muted, expression softened into near stillness, every movement measured, every reaction premeditated. And when the face began to fail, when the cracks deepened or the colour changed, more powder was added, more chalk, more egg white, more rouge. It wasn't repair, it was concealment. Beneath each layer, the skin faded, and beneath the fading, identity blurred. You were not your body, you were your image. There were no mirrors bright enough to reveal the damage, only flickering glass, dim reflections in basin water or polished brass. Imperfections were felt, not seen, and even if they were visible, there was little choice. To stop was to unrave. Hell, to be seen as you truly were was unthinkable. Even the scent of beauty was artificial. Powders carried floral tones or soft mineral smells. Lavender, crushed pearl, the faint trace of vinegar. A face could be identified by fragrance before features, and when skin flaked, when the mask crumbled, the scent remained, a final veil. In quiet corners of the castle, ingredients were prepared with care. Vinegar left to steep in lead bowls, chalk pounded until it sifted like dust, egg whites beaten until they thickened into glaze. It wasn't medicine, it wasn't art, it was control, over skin, over aging, over perception. And so the faces endured, pale, powdered, precise. Behind every soft veil was a canvas touched by centuries of silence. Behind every smile 1,000 decisions made for the sake of stillness. There was no space for blemish, no tolerance for exposure, only the ongoing ritual of remaining untouchable. And as one day blurred into another, the face became not a reflection, but a shield. Still, fragile, perfectly composed. As the powdered faces moved quietly through candle-lit halls, another feature began to take center stage. The forehead, not merely a patch of skin above the eyes, but a canvas of status, elegance, and silent ambition. In medieval beauty, the ideal was not boldness, but length. A high, uninterrupted forehead became a symbol of grace and intellect. It suggested refinement, study, and an absence of earthly burdens. To possess such a forehead was to appear closer to the heavens, still contemplative, distant from the noise of common life. So the hairline was pushed back, deliberately and without hesitation, a process both meticulous and unrelenting. Strands were removed one by one using small metal tweezers. Some opted for creams or salves meant to thin the hair at the root, their ingredients laced with vinegar, lime, or substances whispered about in guarded tones. The goal was simple: make space. Space for clarity, space for serenity, space for the impression of thoughtfulness that never had to be spoken aloud. Eyebrows, too, were quietly erased. They interrupted the clean slope of the forehead and drew the eye downward. So they were plucked into near invisibility, sometimes removed entirely. What remained was a wide expanse of skin, smooth and bare, stretching from brow to crown, like a window to the soul, or perhaps a curtain drawn over it. The process required patience. Pain was part of the ritual, accepted without question. Each stroke of the tweezer, each application of cream, was a small offering to an ideal that cared little for comfort. And when the skin grew red or tender, powders returned. Soft white layers to cool the burn, to blur the irritation, to perfect the illusion. The face now began not at the cheeks or chin, but higher, quieter, emptier. It wasn't just fashion, it was philosophy etched into the body. A high forehead implied not just beauty, but wisdom. It marked one as gentle, learned, and elevated. It suggested a life of quiet reading, of spiritual thought, of long walks through walled gardens with hands folded and head bowed. Art followed suit. Portraits from the era often showed women with serene expressions and smooth, expansive brows. Their foreheads rose like moonlight over still water, silent, pale, and endless. Poets praised them. painters emphasized them. The idea echoed from one castle wall to the next until it no longer seemed like a choice, but a requirement. Fashion helped the illusion. Hoods were pulled tightly over the scalp. Veils and wimples framed the face in soft fabric, drawing attention upward. The hair that remained was carefully tucked, hidden, or shaped to follow the line of the forehead. The result was not striking in the modern sense. It was soft, restrained, controlled. Some women, unable to commit fully to the ritual, found other ways. They shaded the upper brow, shifted their part, or wore bands to obscure the natural hairline. Small adjustments, quiet compromises, the appearance mattered more than the method. And as the trend spread through courts and across countries, it became less a moment in fashion and more a mark of identity. To walk into a room with a low hairline was to arrive already diminished. To show brows was to distract. To keep them hidden was to be in alignment with something larger than self, something slow, deliberate, and lasting. The face, once a surface for expression, became a landscape of restraint. Its angles softened, its edges blurred, and the forehead rose, higher, whiter, emptier, a silent monument to elegance sculpted from skin. As the forehead rose into prominence, what remained below it began to vanish. In the medieval hierarchy of features, the eyebrows had no place. They were interruptions, dark lines that broke the stillness of a perfectly sculpted face, and so they too were removed. The absence of eyebrows was not a mistake, it was a message. Their erasure spoke of control, of refinement, of one's distance from nature's unruly edges. To be without them was to appear untouched by the ordinary, to elevate oneself above instinct, expression, and distraction. The process, like much of beauty in that age, was patient and unforgiving. Tweezers plucked each hair with quiet precision, but for those seeking faster results, or more permanent ones, stronger methods were used. Mixtures of quicklime and vinegar, sometimes laced with traces of arsenic, were applied carefully to the brow. The paste burned just enough to thin the hair at its roots, erasing it gradually over time. The sensation was sharp, and the after effects lingered. Tenderness, reddening, sometimes even blistering. But that was part of the ritual. Beauty, then, was not gentle. It was a slow and silent endurance. There were no pencils to draw them back in, no brushes to mimic what had been taken away. The goal was not illusion. It was absence, a smooth, pale space where once there had been shape and shadow. Portraits from the period reflect this calm vacancy, faces framed by nothing but skin, eyes that floated in unbroken whiteness, expressions that held no surprise, no mischief, no defiance, just quiet. And in that quiet there was meaning. The absence of brows allowed the eye to move upward toward the carefully cleared forehead. It gave the face a vertical rhythm, chin, cheeks, eyes, and then the vast, pale dome that crowned it all. The effect was serene, almost statuesque. Some areas, more exposed to outside influence, allowed for subtle lines or faint traces of shape, but these were exceptions, not expectations. The prevailing standard was clean, controlled, erased. This wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a class marker. Only those with time, tools, and the luxury of stillness could afford to maintain such an appearance. A face without eyebrows did not belong to the fields, to the market, or to the smoke-dark kitchens. It belonged to parlours, chapels, and the hushed corners of royal courts. And so each morning the mirror became a place of quiet transformation, a place where the face was softened, smoothed, and simplified, where anything too bold, too natural, too expressive was taken away. Even men, especially those close to the royal eye, sometimes followed the trend. Their brows, if not fully erased, were lightened or shaped to match the gentle curve of the face. It was not about femininity, it was about discipline, a reflection of refinement in a world that prized stillness above all else. And when all was finished, the face was left unmarked, pale skin, high forehead, eyes without frame, a surface that offered no challenge, no interruption, only calm, calculated elegance. It was a quiet kind of beauty, one that asked for nothing, one that revealed very little, a beauty that held its breath and never quite exhaled. With the brows gone and the skin rendered pale and still, the medieval face was nearly complete. Yet beneath all that whiteness, something was missing. Just a touch of warmth, a flicker of life. Not too much, just enough to suggest that breath still lingered behind the porcelain. A faint blush was the finishing note. It symbolized youth, fertility, and the quiet bloom of health. But it had to be subtle, as if it arrived naturally, uninvited. Too much, and it would betray effort. Too obvious, and it would invite suspicion. Because in the medieval world, beauty could not appear deliberate. Any sign of vanity hovered close to sin. To seem too interested in one's reflection was to tempt judgment from neighbours, from clergy, from the whispered eyes of the court. So the blush had to be there, and yet not there, present but deniable. It began with natural ingredients. Beets sliced and pressed, strawberries crushed into a soft red pulp. Mulberries, if they could be found, gave a deeper shade. Insects, too, were used, dried, ground into fine powder, mixed with a bit of oil or water and tapped gently onto the cheeks. The colour was temporary, a faint whisper across the face. It faded quickly, but that was the point. For those without access to fruit or pigment, there were simpler methods. Rubbing the cheeks with clean fingers or a soft cloth could bring a quick, fleeting flush, just enough to catch the light, just enough to seem accidental. But the risk remained. To appear too rosy was to raise questions. Where did it come from? Why was it there? In a world where modesty was a virtue and self-presentation was a moral act, even a touch of colour could be interpreted as an invitation. Or a rebellion. And yet the temptation lingered. A quiet glow on the face suggested strength in the body. It whispered of vitality, of quiet joy, of the ease that came with being untouched by age or illness. It softened the starkness of powdered skin and gave shape to the silence. So the ritual continued, carefully and in private. Blush was applied in thin layers, just a fingertip's worth, tapped and blended. It was hidden beneath veils or allowed to peek through only in moments of safety, and if noticed, it was always denied, explained away as wind, as warmth, as nothing at all. Even the church could be lenient, so long as the woman was noble or pious or modest enough to carry it lightly. Some nuns were said to wear a faint touch of colour on feast days, a quiet celebration woven into ritual, but never too much, never enough to make a statement. There was no glamour here, no bold red lips, no gleam of painted elegance, only the soft suggestion of a pulse, a quiet trace of youth. And when the moment passed, when the guests had left or the candles had burned low, the colour was wiped away. A damp cloth, a quiet rinse, and the cheeks returned to white, still, composed, as though nothing had been added at all. In this world of layers and restraint, even the smallest bloom had to be controlled. Beauty could glow, but never shine. It could blush, but never boast. The face, once again, was returned to silence. After the quiet blush faded into stillness, and the face returned to its pale composure, attention drifted upward, toward the hair, that final veil of identity and desire. In medieval beauty, the hair was not just a feature, it was a symbol, a silent halo that spoke of purity, status, and heaven itself. Blonde hair held the highest place. It was seen not as a colour, but as a blessing, a mark of innocence, of virtue, of divine favour. In paintings and sacred texts, saints and holy figures were often given golden strands, soft as sunlight and just as unreachable. Even the Virgin Mary, far from northern lands, was often portrayed as flaxen-haired, her lightness made to mirror the divine. For those not born with this rare glow, the pursuit began early. Women mixed saffron with herbs, ground ash into fine powder, and steeped chamomile into warm baths. These mixtures were combed gently through the hair, then left to dry beneath the open sky. It was called sun-basking. The hair, wet with tinctures, was laid out to catch the light. The process was slow, requiring stillness and time, sometimes hours, sometimes days. The sun became both mirror and tool, coaxing brightness from strands that resisted. Other recipes were less gentle. Some included vinegar, salt, or even urine. The source didn't matter, only the result. If the hair turned lighter, if it shimmered in daylight or caught the gold of candle flame, the discomfort was forgotten. The scent faded, the colour remained. Long, loose waves were the ideal. Hair that drifted over the shoulders and curved down the back like soft silk. But not every woman could wear it so freely. This was a luxury reserved for the unmarried, the untouched, a signal of virtue that moved with every step, every turn of the head. It was beauty as declaration. For the married, hair became something private, something hidden, veiled beneath layers of cloth, net, ting, or linen wraps. It disappeared into modesty, not because it was no longer beautiful, but because it was no longer meant for the world. And yet, even when covered, it mattered. Underneath wimples and coifs, hair was braided, oiled and perfumed. Ribbons were threaded through strands, tiny pins tucked into curls. What could not be shown was still preserved. Beauty, even in secret, was never neglected. In noble households, the care of hair was a ritual, a time for patience, quiet and gentle repetition. Combs made of bone or ivory moved slowly through tangled lengths. Oils were warmed between palms. Hair was divided, twisted, arranged. It wasn't performance, it was practice. Even men in certain courts took part in the ritual. Long hair, often curled or shaped, became part of their presence, not flamboyant, just polished, another reflection of grace and control. But for women, hair remained more than adornment. It was identity, a reflection of youth, of chastity, of transition. It could be dyed, lightened, perfumed, but above all, it had to remain soft, effortless, heavenly. And when the strands were finally tucked away, when the veil was drawn or the braid was pinned, the transformation was complete, the face pale and composed, the body clothed in silence, the hair hidden but remembered. There, beneath linen and lace, beauty continued, quiet, bound, glowing only where no one could see. Once the hair was lightened, brushed, and carefully arranged, it rarely stayed uncovered. In the world beyond the mirror, hair was not merely an adornment, it was a secret, one that had to be protected. For a married woman, hair was no longer a display, it became a boundary. Veils were the first line of defence, light fabrics draped from the crown, soft and sheer, catching the faintest breeze as she walked. Beneath that, the wimple, a linen wrap that circled the neck and chin, anchoring the veil and concealing the shape of the face. Together, they covered the head like a curtain drawn over something too precious to be seen. The covering wasn't optional, it was required. Hair was linked not only to beauty, but to virtue, to modesty, to obedience. Allowing it to flow freely after marriage was considered reckless, an invitation, a disruption to the quiet order of things. And so it was hidden, layer by layer, wrapped and tucked away. But the coverings didn't stop at function. Over time, they became elaborate. Embroidery crept along the edges. Fine threads were stitched into patterns that shimmered under candlelight. Pearls were sewn along seams. Gold thread twisted into delicate borders. What had begun as concealment slowly transformed into a different kind of expression. Still modest, still controlled, but layered with quiet wealth. A woman's head could carry her status more clearly than her dress. Each veil, each pin, each choice of cloth marked her place in the world. Silk whispered of nobility. Simple linen kept her within the expected boundaries of piety. Lace spoke softly of wealth, but also of restraint. It was a language without sound, spoken in folds and fibres. The act of covering became ritual. Each morning the hair was brushed, coiled and wrapped. A cap was tied tightly to flatten the shape, followed by the wimple secured beneath the chin. Then came the veil, often fastened with small pins or pressed beneath the weight of a circlet. The process was slow, steady, and exact. In certain courts, the headwear became taller, broader, more theatrical. Structures rose in height, sometimes supported by wires or padded frames. These weren't designed for comfort or practicality. They were displays of refinement, measured not in ease, but in how well one could carry discomfort with grace. And yet, behind all this, the same rule remained. The hair must not be seen. To let a strand slip forward was to invite judgment. It could be viewed as carelessness, or worse, defiance. In some places, laws and religious codes enforced these coverings with clarity. Hair, once visible, now belonged only to the private world, the home, the husband, the mirror. Even within homes, the coverings were sometimes worn out of habit, not just for modesty, but as protection from dust, oil, and fire. The veils became part of the woman herself, as much a feature of her silhouette as her hands or eyes. And beneath it all, the hair remained, braided, perfumed, protected, a secret woven into quiet coils. To cover it was to be proper, to cover it well was to be admired. And so, day after day, the ritual continued, not loud, not dramatic, just the gentle weight of cloth, the soft press of pins, the hidden shimmer of gold in folds of white. A crown not made of metal, but of linen and patience. After layers of linen and quiet folds of modesty, there emerged something less restrained, something taller, sharper, and altogether impossible to ignore. The hennin. It rose like a tower from the crown of the head, a long conical structure, delicate and severe, worn not for warmth or protection, but for presence. It was not meant to blend in. The hennin announced itself, rising boldly above veils and silks, declaring not just style, but station. To wear one was to be seen even when silent. The tallest were worn by the wealthiest. Their height alone set them apart. Some extended a foot or more into the air, while others bent slightly backward, as if drawn by some unseen wind. They were often white or pale grey, covered in fine cloth. At the tip, a veil would spill downward in a narrow stream, softening the shape but never hiding its structure. Wearing the hennin required more than choice. It required commitment. The hair beneath it had to disappear. For some, that meant shaving the front of the scalp to allow the cone to sit cleanly and to lengthen the appearance of the forehead, already an ideal of beauty in this world. For others, the hair was braided tightly and pinned flat, hidden beneath caps or netting, before the hennin was carefully set in place. It could not wobble, it could not shift. The illusion depended on stillness, and it was not light. Though hollow, the structure carried weight, both physical and social. Walking beneath one required grace. Sitting with one demanded care. Moving through doorways meant adjusting posture and often pace. But for those who wore it, these burdens were part of the message. A hennin did not belong to the hurried or to the working. It belonged to women who could afford discomfort, women who needed neither function nor freedom of movement. Their beauty could be tall, slow, and utterly impractical. The hennin also served as a cure, its form of separation. While common women wore caps or scarves, the elite extended their presence upward, a vertical declaration that no labour touched their lives, that they walked through halls and courtyards as figures to be looked at, not spoken to. Still, not everyone admired the towering fashion. Clergy in particular found the hennin excessive, its shape too pointed, its symbolism too proud. Some likened it to horns, others to towers of vanity. Sermons were given, poems written, warnings whispered about the sin of rising too high, even in fabric. but the hennin remained. Mocked or admired, it continued to crown the heads of noble women across courts and kingdoms, often copied, never truly replicated. Its height was earned, not gifted, its presence carefully managed. And when the day ended, when the veil was lifted and the cone removed, the hair beneath it bore the marks, pressed flat, slightly creased, smelling faintly of oil and linen. The scalp tingled from pressure, the forehead smooth from absence. Another performance completed. The hennin was not just fashion, it was architecture, a structure balanced on the body, built not of stone, but of meaning. And like the high forehead, the powdered skin, the veiled hair, it served the same purpose, to rise above the ordinary and to do so in silence. Beneath the layers of powder, the veils, and the towering hennin, the body itself became another quiet canvas, one that had to match the same ideals of restraint, softness, and silent refinement. Beauty in this world was not about strength or health, it was about suggestion, a hint of presence never too solid, a shape that seemed to belong more to a painting than to flesh and breath. The desired form was one of fragility, not weak, not broken, but untouched, a body that moved slowly, gracefully, without urgency. Soft curves were favoured, but not too many, slightly rounded, never firm. The waist narrowed, the shoulders softened, the frame overall held in a gentle stillness. It was an image that suggested delicacy, an elegance on the edge of illness, as though the body itself were too refined for the physical world. Waistlines were carefully managed. Though the corset as it's known today had yet to take full form, its early predecessors had already arrived. Girdles and laced bodices drew in the middle, pressing the silhouette inward. Fabric layered tightly against the skin, shaping without revealing, holding the body in place like a sculpture behind cloth. Clothing added to the illusion. Long vertical lines, trailing hems, high necks, all contributed to the sense of length and grace. The goal was not simply to look slim, but to appear stretched, subtle and weightless, like the lines in a medieval illustration, where the figure seemed to float just above the ground. A body too muscular broke the illusion. It suggested movement, labour, effort, and effort was not part of the ideal. Muscles belonged to the field, to the forge, to the marketplace, not to the drawing room, not to the chapel. The beauty of the body lay in its distance from necessity, but to be too thin was no better. There had to be softness, or else the image turned brittle. Thinness was associated with illness, not elegance. It lacked vitality. It suggested poverty, not grace. The right balance was somewhere in between, neither strong nor sick, but gentle, present and yet barely so. Even posture played its part. Shoulders slightly rounded forward, arms close to the body. The hands were often kept still, held lightly together or resting in the lap. Movements were small, graceful, deliberate. The body did not demand attention. It allowed itself to be noticed only in stillness. And when a woman moved, her clothing amplified the effect. Fabric followed behind her, whispered around her feet. The length of the gown, the weight of the sleeves, the softness of the veil, all choreographed to maintain that single impression, a figure not meant to labour, not meant to struggle, but to exist quietly, beautifully, at a distance. What was rarely spoken became known through repetition. Every garment, every accessory, every gesture reinforced the same message. The ideal body was not something to be touched or studied, but to be observed gently, like a flame protected from wind. And so, the body, like the face, became part of the performance. One more element in the long, layered composition of medieval beauty, measured, restrained, and always just slightly out of reach. After the body was shaped in fabric and suggestion, attention drifted to what remained uncovered: the eyes. In a world that silenced so much, voice, skin, gesture, the eyes were left to speak, and so they did, carefully, deliberately, and always in whispers. Large eyes were the ideal, wide, open, and soft. They were described as soulful, quiet, filled with feeling yet never forceful, the kind of eyes that appeared to listen even when they looked. Roundness was favoured over sharpness, darkness over brightness. The gaze was not meant to challenge, it was meant to invite reflection. To enhance this, subtle methods emerged. Smoke and soot were used to deepen the lash line. Fine powders made from ash, charcoal, or crushed minerals were dabbed gently at the edges, darkening the contours. This soft shading gave the illusion of depth, shadows where none existed, emotion where none was spoken. Sometimes tears were used, a well-timed glisten across the eye, whether drawn from feeling or coaxed with herbs, made the eyes appear larger, more vulnerable. A moist gaze caught the light just enough to reflect softness without speaking it aloud. For those unable to summon tears, a bit of oil could be traced along the lower lid. The effect was similar, a surface that shimmered like water held in place. And in the rare moments when a woman did look directly at someone, it meant something. Eye contact was not casual, it carried weight. In certain circles it was almost ceremonial. To lower the eyes was expected, to raise them slowly was art. A glance could convey more than a sentence. In court, a single look could mean alliance, defiance, warning. In chapel, it might carry quiet reverence, and between strangers it could linger like a question left unanswered. But for most, the eyes remained downward, not from fear, but from design. It protected the image of stillness. The gaze was preserved, saved for rare occasions, offered like a gift. To look up was to be seen, and being seen was never without consequence. Artists of the time captured this with precision. In portraits, women's eyes often gazed sideways, just shy of full attention. Their pupils shaded softly, framed by lashes too even to be accidental. These were not snapshots of emotion. They were carefully constructed windows, eyes painted like prayers, quiet, held, unspoken. Even the placement of colour on the face helped direct attention toward the eyes. The paleness of the skin, the absence of brows, the smooth rise of the forehead, all pulled the gaze inward, toward the eyes, toward what remained. And so, while most features were hidden or softened, the eyes endured. They were allowed to hold shape, to carry the expression that the rest of the face denied. In them lived everything that could not be said: longing, grace, distance, belief. Eyes became the final language of medieval beauty, a code read not with words, but with patience. They flickered beneath veils, stared from frescoes, and watched silently across candle-lit tables. They asked for nothing, but they revealed everything. And in the stillness of long halls and slow afternoons, it was often the eyes that lingered, not because they moved, but because they waited. After the eyes had spoken all that could be said without words, there remained one final expression, a smile. But in the medieval world, a smile was not given freely. It was measured, controlled, and carefully shaped to protect more than it revealed. The mouth, like the rest of the face, was part of the performance, and its condition, more than any other feature, was vulnerable to time. Good teeth were rare. They wore down early, stained with age, darkened by diet. Sugars were not common, but grains and poor water left their marks. There were few remedies, fewer solutions, and so the smile became a risk. To show too much was to expose imperfection, so the preferred smile was quiet, lips closed, barely upturned, just enough to soften the face, not enough to open it. This kind of smile was considered graceful, reserved. It preserved dignity while offering warmth. It protected the speaker while inviting the listener to lean just a little closer. Breath, too, became part of this quiet concern. To manage it, small rituals were woven into daily life. Bundles of herbs, cloves, fennel, mint, were carried in pockets or tucked into sleeves. chewed slowly after meals, they cooled the mouth and masked whatever lingered. Sometimes small twigs were used as brushes, their ends softened into bristles. Rubbed gently across the teeth, they cleared debris and left behind the clean scent of bark and earth. Other methods were more ceremonial. Wine mixed with vinegar, or rinses made from sage or thyme. The taste was sharp, but the effect was noticeable. Breath, like the skin, was expected to remain discreet. It was not meant to speak before the voice did, and so the smile was built from layers of care, of caution, of intention. Artists of the time rarely painted open mouths. In portraits, the lips are pressed gently together, serene and unreadable. Expressions are quiet. There is no laughter, and no gleam of teeth, just the still presence of a mouth that might speak but chooses not to. In public, a smile had meaning. It could signal agreement, submission, or grace, but only if given with precision. Too wide, and it seemed foolish. Too sudden, and it suggested vanity. The ideal was soft, brief, and always controlled. Even in joy, restraint remained. Among the elite, conversation was measured, and expressions were tools. A well-timed glance, a slight turn of the lips. These were the gestures that shaped interaction. They did not require sound, only awareness. And when a smile faded, it left no trace. The lips returned to stillness, the face to its polished calm. What lingered was never the smile itself, but the memory of having been noticed. In this way, the mouth, like the eyes, like the skin, like the hair, was not just a part of the body. It was part of the language of appearance. It spoke without words. It held meaning without motion. It could charm, disarm, and even defend, all in silence. And so, each day as the face was prepared, the smile was not forgotten. It was shaped without paint, defined without colour, practiced in mirrors, polished like a quiet weapon, not to reveal, but to protect. As women shaped themselves into quiet portraits of grace and stillness, men, too, were drawn into the soft geometry of appearance. Beauty was never limited by gender. It only shifted in form. For men, the ideal was no less curated, though it often arrived under the illusion of effortlessness. The desired figure was tall, but not imposing, lean, but not hard. Strength was suggested, never shown. A noble posture mattered more than muscle. Shoulders pulled back, head held just above the horizon, every movement slow and unhurried. To appear too eager was to appear untrained. Refinement required stillness. A man's presence needed no volume, only weight. Hair, though less adorned than a woman's, still followed the same quiet rituals. It was often left longer on top, cut neatly at the sides, sometimes curled or brushed into soft waves. Not elaborate, just enough to suggest control, a careful arrangement that never asked to be noticed, yet always was. Beards and stubble were rare among the elite. A clean face signified youth and purity of thought. When facial hair did appear, it was shaped closely to the jaw, trimmed with precision, more an ornament than a feature. Grooming was not vanity, it was discipline. Clothing did the rest. Tailored layers fell over the body with intention. Long tunics, cinched at the waist, created a silhouette that lengthened the form. Cloaks draped across one shoulder or gathered at the chest, giving the illusion of height and ease. Colours were chosen with care, muted, but rich. Deep greens, softened blues, browns that faded into grey in candlelight. These garments didn't simply dress the body, they shaped it. They created the impression of nobility before a word was spoken. Fine belts, embroidered cuffs, soft leather gloves, all spoke to a man's place without needing confirmation. Every fold, every texture was part of a language, one spoken silently, understood by all. Shoes too mattered. Narrow, pointed at the toe, polished when possible. Not for walking long distances, but for being seen standing still. Movement was minimal. Poise was constant. The body, like the clothing, held its form. There was no rushing, no unnecessary gesture. Even in laughter, a man's face did not move too freely. Accessories were subtle, a ring, a brooch, perhaps a small chain at the neck, not to display wealth, but to suggest legacy, items passed down, worn lightly, not as trophies, but as inheritance. Even the scent worn was soft, drawn from herbs or dried flowers, tucked into small pouches and stitched into the lining of a cloak. The illusion of ease required effort. Every aspect of presentation, hair, posture, fabric, scent, worked together to project balance, and beneath it all was the same unspoken rule: never let the work show. Masculine beauty did not demand admiration, it allowed it, quietly, gracefully, and when man and woman stood side by side, the symmetry completed itself. Her softness met his stillness, her silence echoed in his poise. Neither interrupted the other. Both were designed to be seen, not heard, to be remembered, not revealed. Together they became part of the same vision, two figures drawn from the same thread of ritual and control, held in place by posture, by polish, and by centuries of quiet expectation. After posture was perfected and every fold of fabric fell into place, there remained one final layer, one that could not be seen, only sensed: scent. In the medieval world, fragrance was more than preference. It was protection. Against illness, against judgment, against the invisible reach of impurity. A good scent was not just pleasant, it was moral, it was noble, it was necessary. The body, cloaked in layers of cloth, often went unwashed for long stretches. Full baths were rare and complicated, especially during colder seasons. So instead, people turned to what was known as dry bathing. A simple cloth, dampened slightly, was used to wipe the skin. Then came the scent, spritzed, patted, or dusted gently over the surface. It masked what lingered, and more importantly, it signaled care. Pomanders were among the most cherished tools of this practice. Small orbs made of metal, silver, tin, or brass, filled with a mixture of herbs, flowers, and resins. Cloves, cinnamon, rosemary, and lavender were most common. Some were pierced with tiny holes to let the fragrance escape as the wearer moved. Others were opened only during moments of need, held close to the nose while walking through crowded streets, carried into court, kept near during prayer. Scented gloves served the same quiet function. Leather softened with oils, then infused with floral waters or crushed petals. When worn, the hands left a subtle trail of fragrance, a signature that lingered longer than a glance. Small sachets filled with dried herbs were tucked into sleeves or under layers of linen. Pouches of thyme, mint, or marjoram, simple blends sewn into soft fabric, resting close to the skin. Not only did they sweeten the body, they were believed to purify it, to defend it from unseen dangers. Scent was tied closely to health, and even more tightly to virtue. A clean-smelling body was seen as disciplined. Elev, baited, holy, even. A body that reeked of labour or decay was thought to reflect something deeper: moral weakness, spiritual neglect, a lack of refinement. And so fragrance became a quiet declaration of who one was and who one was not. The poor could not afford such rituals. Their scent was shaped by fire, by earth, by work. But among the elite, every whiff of rose or myrrh was a quiet reminder of separation, not only from poverty, but from effort itself. Men and women both took part in this scented world. A nobleman's cloak might carry hints of cedarwood or musk, a residue from herbs stored between folds. A noblewoman's hair, perfumed with crushed violet or chamomile, might leave its trace on a pillow, a veil, or a whispered breath. And while fragrance had its beauty, it also had its purpose. During illness, strong smells were believed to shield the body. Physicians carried scented cloths and pomanders. Church altars were filled with incense. Homes burned rosemary to cleanse the air. In a time when disease moved unseen, scent became a kind of armor. But it was more than defense. It was identity. A person's scent lingered long after they had gone. It clung to fabric, to touch, to memory. And so, long after the candles dimmed and footsteps faded from the corridor, the perfume remained, floating quietly, invisible and unmistakable. After every layer of powder, every measured glance, every carefully arranged scent, there remained something far less visible, a weight that pressed quietly beneath the surface of it all, the weight of expectation, of virtue, of judgment. In the medieval world, beauty was never just about appearance. It carried with it a set of meanings, spiritual, social, and moral. A beautiful woman was often seen as touched by grace. Her appearance, if modest and serene, was read as a reflection of divine favor. Smooth skin, gentle posture, and soft expression were not only admired, they were interpreted as signs of inner goodness. But that same beauty could quickly shift from blessing to burden. If a woman appeared too aware of her reflection, if her clothing shimmered too brightly, if her eyes lingered too long in a mirror, or her perfume hung too sweetly in the air, she risked crossing a line between grace and vanity, between admiration and accusation. Vanity, after all, was no small sin. To seek beauty for its own sake was considered dangerous. It meant pride, distraction, a turning away from the soul and toward the body, and the body in this world was always meant to be quiet, controlled, secondary. So women walked a narrow path. They were expected to appear beautiful, but only as if they hadn't tried, as if the smoothness of their skin and the shape of their brow had arrived by grace, not by grinding lead into powder or sitting for hours beneath the sun with saffron in their hair. Every gesture of care had to appear effortless, every detail of grooming disguised as habit. The balance was delicate. Too little, and a woman appeared neglected. Too much, and she appeared vain. The right amount of beauty was always just enough to be noticed, but never enough to be questioned. It was a silent performance, a constant layering and erasing of self. Appear graceful, but not proud. Be lovely, but never bold. Allow beauty to shine, but never admit to polishing it. The burden of this balance was almost invisible, yet it shaped every ritual. Each morning routine was laced with quiet restraint, each garment chosen not just for color or texture, but for what it suggested. Each look in the mirror, brief, careful, and quickly turned away. Even admiration came with caution. Compliments were accepted with downcast eyes, as if unaware of their cause. A beautiful woman was never to acknowledge her beauty aloud. She became a mirror to others, reflecting purity, devotion, or class, but never fully present in her own reflection. And beneath all of this lay the unspoken truth that a woman's beauty, though praised, could also be her undoing. It invited attention, envy, desire, and doubt. It was both her shield and her exposure, her power and her risk. And so, through veils, powders, glances, and silence, she learned to walk the narrow edge, not to fall on either side, not to vanish completely, but never to shine too brightly. A quiet line, stretched thin across centuries, held steady by ritual, shaped by belief, and carried, gracefully, silently, by every woman who dared to be seen. And now, as the last veil is drawn, and the candle burns low beside the mirror, we leave behind this quiet world of powdered skin, painted prayers, and silent rules. A world where beauty whispered more than it spoke, where every gesture was measured, every glance a signal, every breath a decision. In these halls of stillness, elegance came not from excess, but from restraint. The true performance lay not in the eyes of others, but in the soft choreography of daily rituals, careful, quiet, and unseen. These standards may have faded, but the echoes remain. In the mirrors we pass, in the choices we make, in the stories we still carry. Tonight, you've wandered through a world shaped not by loud colors or fast change, but by centuries of slow intention. You've moved through powdered corridors, past veiled glances and high foreheads, past painted cheeks and hidden strands of hair. Now there is nothing left to do but let it go. Let the layers fall away. Let the stillness settle in. Let the noise of the world grow soft, like footsteps disappearing into stone halls behind you. You are no longer being looked at. You do not need to be seen. Close your eyes and rest. You've traveled far.